Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make apple crisp bars, and this is what it looks like. This is a 3-layer bar. On the bottom we have a buttery crisp shortbread crust. Next we have slices of sweetened apples, and then on top this delicious streusel. So the first thing that you will need to do is to preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need an 8-inch square pan that's 20 centimeters. And I've lined my pan with foil. You could also just use parchment paper. And what I like is a little extra foil, like up the sides, and then a little bit of a lip here so that we can just lift out our bars when we're finished, and it's really easy to cut them. So I'm going to butter my pan. You could just spray it with one of those non-stick sprays. So what I've done is just melted a little bit of butter, and I'm just using a pastry brush to butter my foil. Or if you're using parchment paper, just butter that. That way, although, you know, shortbread is it's buttery, but we'll make sure it doesn't stick to our foil by buttering the pan. A little extra butter, never hurt anybody. Okay, so there we go. So now we're going to start with our shortbread crust. If you have a stand mixer like I have here, use your paddle attachment. You could use a hand mixer for this, or really you could just use a bowl with a wooden spoon, because all we're going to do is mix the ingredients together. You don't have to incorporate a lot of air, because if you've ever had a shortbread cookie, it's really dense. So you don't want to beat air into it. So the first thing we need is, of course, butter. 6 tablespoons, 85 grams of butter. Have your butter at room temperature. I'm using unsalted. If you wanted to use salted, you could go ahead and do that. Just leave out the salt that's in the recipe. And then I'm going to add 3 tablespoons, 40 grams of light brown sugar. I'm not putting too much sugar in our shortbread crust because we're going to have, lightly sweetened apples, and then of course we have the streusel on top. So now what I'm going to do is beat these together just on medium-low speed, just until everything's all mixed together and it's nice and smooth. Okay, so let's just get that mixed together. And as always, when you're making any batter, periodically scrape down the sides and the bottom of your bowl to make sure everything gets mixed together. Okay, so for the dry ingredients, I have 1 cup, which is 130 grams of all-purpose flour, plain flour. To that, I'm just adding 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram. I'm using a fine kosher salt. You could use table salt, and just whisk that together. No baking powder in shortbreads, because like I said before, you want a nice dense texture. And I'm just going to add that and beat it in on low speed just until I don't want a solid ball of dough, just until it starts to come together. Okay, that looks good. All I want to do here is make sure that all the flour is moistened. I'm not looking for like a solid ball of dough like other cake batters. So I'm just gonna, yeah, that looks good. So as you can see, you could easily do this by hand. So now all I'm going to do is we're going to put this in here and press it into the bottom of the pan. So, I mean, you could use a spoon. I'm just going to use my fingers just to press it down and make sure it's a nice even layer. Make sure you get in the corners. It looks pretty good. Now we are going to bake this off. And that way, when we're finished, making our bars, the shortbread crust will stay nice and crisp. So that's why we're gonna pre-bake our bottom layer here. So that looks good. So what I'm gonna do is bake this, I'm gonna say 13 to 15 minutes. I give you a little bit of a range because everybody's oven is a little different. I do like to rotate my pan front to back about halfway through. So what we're looking for is just a little bit of color, just a very light brown to the shortbread. So I'm going to say 13 to 15 minutes. Our shortbread crust is done. Just a little bit of color to it and it is set. So I just put my pan on a wire rack. Just gonna let that sit there. And now we're gonna make our streusel topping. I'm just using the same bowl that I used to make the shortbread. Actually, I didn't even bother washing it because it's all the same recipe. So again, you could use a hand mixer or you could just a bowl with a wooden spoon. The first thing that you will need to do, you will need a third of a cup, 35 grams of nuts. I'm using pecans today. You could use walnuts, you could use almonds, hazelnuts. And I do like to toast the nuts because it really brings out their flavor. So what you need to do is just put put my pecans on a baking sheet, pop it into the oven, maybe 6 to 8 minutes, just until you start to smell them. And then let them cool completely, and then you want to chop them. I've already done that, so that's what you need to do. And then in our mixing bowl, you will need a quarter of a cup, 32 grams of all-purpose flour. You will need a quarter of a cup, 50 grams of light brown sugar. I like cinnamon, so a half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Put that third of a cup, 35 grams of our toasted and chopped nuts. I'm going to add some rolled oats. Third of a cup, yeah. Sometimes there's just so many measurements to remember. A third of a cup, 30 grams of rolled oats. Now there's two types of rolled oats. There's the old-fashioned and the quick cooking. The difference is really just in the thickness of the oats. I like the old-fashioned because they have a thicker texture. But really, I mean, you could use the quick cooking if that's all you have in the house. And then you will need 4 tablespoons, 55 grams of butter, cold butter, and I've just cut it into little tiny, diced it, I guess you would call it. Let's put it in there. So all I'm going to do is put the mixer on medium-low and let it mix away until it all gets together and starts to form clumps. Now, if you were doing this by hand, you'd want to first mix all your dry ingredients and then cut your butter into the mixture. You could use a pastry blender. You could just use your fingertips just until it starts to clump together. Okay, we are done. I'm just going to transfer this over to a bowl. You don't have to at home, just so you can see it. I love this streusel. Put it on top of anything. Okay. So this, you can kind of see it's clumping, holds together like that. So that is our streusel. You know, actually, if you wanted to, you could make this ahead of time and just like the day before and put it into the refrigerator, and then when you're ready to make the bars, you can just pull it out and it's ready to go. So now I'm just going to clean up, and when I come back, we will cut up our apples and assemble and bake it off. So now for our apples. You will need 3, I guess you'd call those large apples, like that. I mean, if you want to get really precise, we need 4 cups. But to tell you the truth, I just go and get 3 large apples, and I don't even bother to measure it. Because, you know, if it's a little more, a little less, that layer, it's not really going to matter. So what you want to do is, of course, peel and then core it and then cut it into, we want thin slices. I would say maybe 1/8 of an inch. So on your cutting board, just, you know, pretty thin. So I've already done that, and just put it into a large bowl. Now, apples. What kind of apples? What you want is a firm textured apple that holds its shape when it's baked. You don't want one that kind of breaks down and becomes mushy, because we want the apples to still be a little tender. I don't like that layer kind of mushy, so that's why I'm using a firm textured. Now, you could use, there's a variety. You could use a tart apple, like a Granny Smith. I'm using a Gala or Gala, whichever way you want to say it. A Braeburn, a Golden Delicious. You know, there's a variety. You could actually mix a couple. Or, you know, if you live in a place and they have an apple orchard close by, you can go and pick and see what they have, as long as it's a firm textured. You know, try different ones. Now, I'm just very lightly sweetening my apples. Because I'm actually using the Gala apples, I mean, there's a little bit of tartness to them, but they're sweet tart, I'd call it. Not like a Granny Smith that is tart. So I'm only using 1.5 tablespoons, 20 grams of granulated white sugar. So you can adjust that. If you're using like a fairly sweet apple, you could maybe even cut back more. If you're using the Granny Smith, you want to maybe up that, maybe even double it, depending on, you know, if you get a fresh crop, those Granny Smith can be kind of tart. And I'm just adding 1/2 tablespoon, about 4 grams of cornstarch, just a little bit of a thickener, because, you know, as your apples bake, they will release some juices, so just to thicken that up. If you don't have cornstarch, you could just use 1/2 tablespoon of flour. Mix that together. And if you wanted a little cinnamon, you could do that. I just like the cinnamon on the top in the streusel. That's the way I like it. But if you want it within your apples, you're a real cinnamon fan, then you could do that. So just mix it. I'm going to just use my fingers. Separate it, and that way I can make sure all the apple slices are separated. I love apple crisp. I make it a lot. But, you know, typically an apple crisp, you put it in a bowl and you have I like a little scoop of ice cream on top. And it's a casual kind of a pudding. Whereas this, what I like about this is you could take this, you know, if you're going out to someone's house, or, you know, because it's a bar. So it's kind of really handy to transport. So I have my shortbread, and then I'm just going to dump the apples right on top. So you can see here, if you, like I said, I don't really measure the 4 cups of apples. I just use the 3 large. Because really, you know, you have a little more, you have a little less apples. It's not, I know usually I'm pretty precise, but this one, I just go with it. And then just kind of went down. Try to get an even layer there. That is going to shrink down, of course, as it bakes. As they release their juices. Make sure I get it right in the corner there. Okay, and then we have our, I'm just going to wipe my hands here, my streusel. I'll admit it's my favorite part. What I like is just sprinkle it over the top. It becomes all crisp and crunchy. So good. And just kind of spread it out, and I'm just going to pat it down So now, baking. I'm going to say about, put some right on top there, about 40 minutes, you know, 35, I could give you a range of 35 to 45, because I'll say it again, everyone's oven is a little different. So what you're looking for, the streusel will become golden brown and crisp. Your apples are, of course, they're going to shrink down. But if you take like a sharp knife and just put it into the apples, they will be tender. You don't want them still like crisp. You want them nice and tender, but not mushy. So I'm going to say about 40 minutes. I would check it at about the 35 mark, and rotate your pan front to back about halfway through. My pan's not hot, so. Okay. So our apple crisp bars are done. So I put the pan on a wire rack. So what you want to do is just take a sharp knife and put it into the apples, and it'll go in very easily. They're not mushy. As you can see, they're still holding their shape. So that's how I like it. And you can see the streusel is nice and golden brown. So what I'm going to do is just let them cool down to room temperature, just like this. And so when we come back, we will try one. So now our bars have cooled down to room temperature, so they're firm enough to cut. So put it on a cutting board and then with a sharp knife. And you can make them as big or as small as you want. I'll let you decide that. Oh, so there we have it. You know, for these, you could pick them up and just eat them like that, out of hand, or you could make them a plated dessert like this, put on plate. You could serve it with a little bit of whipped cream or vanilla ice cream, just like you would with an apple crisp, and eat it with a fork. I'm going to just pick it up. Choo, choo, choo. I think I've said before, I love apple crisp. So essentially the apples, and then you've got the streusel on the top, is an apple crisp. But then when you add a layer of brown sugar shortbread, it's wonderful. The combination, that crisp, buttery crisp, shortbread crust, and then we didn't use much sugar, because I used a kind of, I would say, a sweet tart apple. So that's why I only used like, what was it, a tablespoon and a half, 20 grams of sugar. And then of course that streusel. I mean, there's so many good things in that. The brown sugar, you got the cinnamon, you got the rolled oats, the pecans. I mean, it's just wonderful. I could just eat that. Now, because we have a layer of apples and then you have the shortbread on the bottom, I do like to store these in the refrigerator. I find they can last, 3-4 days. Not that they ever do, but if I don't, if you don't serve them to a lot of people, they will last quite a few days. So now, as we're shooting this video, I was thinking we have about, up to now, about 600, maybe 650 videos, maybe a little more than that. So you might want to check some other ones out, like the apple crisp, or we have lots of other bars and squares and cakes and cookies and muffins and all that. Now there's a couple ways you can find all of our videos. You can go to ajoyofbaking.com, the YouTube channel. But sometimes, because we have so many videos, it can get a little hard to find them all. So I would recommend going to the ajoyofbaking.com website. If you come in on the home page, you will find our latest video, the picture with a link to the latest video. We have all broken down all our recipes by category. If you want cakes or cookies, or say you want more bars and squares, you can just click on that. and shows you all of our bar and square recipes. Click on whichever one you want to look at. On that page, you have the link to our video. You have a head note where I give you some more information on whatever you're making. I have the written recipe. I have a printer-friendly page, so it's kind of a one-stop shop. You can find everything. So check all those out. You know, you might find something else you'd like to make. And also, you know, some people are saying they subscribe to the channel, but they don't get notified when we put out a new video every week, because we put out a new video almost every Thursday. So if you're finding you're not getting a notification, then right by the subscriber button, there's a little bell. So just press that. And if you press that, then that makes double, like, kind of sure that you will get notified. But, you know, just for your own, if you don't, we put out a new video almost every Thursday. So you kind of know that. So a little bit of extra information for you, but really try these bars. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyabaking.com.